What's up, guys? It's Magnet. It's March 8th. It's time for another episode of Q&A. And the date, I'm sure, has no bearing on this, but it is episode 6. I have been away for just a little while. I went to GDC over the past week to show a game that I'm making. And I've been there for a while, so I haven't had a chance to make a video since I haven't been in town. I've also been stuck in homework hell, but nevertheless, let's get to your guys' questions, and we'll jump right in here. So, this is me once again hanging out in my room with a door and a closet, and that's pretty much it. And this first question is from Mr. 789. He says, say if in the future I wanted to be competitive, besides practice, is there anything else I should know about it beforehand? Oh, being competitive, okay. How to start, when to start, etc. And P.S. if you have the time, could you explain why our channel and stuff name is Magnet? Thanks, GG. GLHF, smiley face. Or I should just pronounce those like :D and see what people say. But, so, if you want to be competitive, you really just need to work on getting better at the game, right? So, the best way to do that is if you know what you need to do, in the sense that you can analyze yourself and say, like, it's clear I don't do this well enough. Then you can spend a lot of time focusing on just one thing at a time. So, if you want to focus on making more workers and being better at that, play 10 games and just focus almost exclusively on that and try not to worry about the rest of the game. You might lose, of course, but always tying that stuff together and just improving the little portions of your game are really going to help. How to start, when to start. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by those. Just start whenever. Just go play on the ladder and play people in ways that are going to try and help you work out the different parts of your game that you want to work on. So I feel like this isn't making any sense, but basically if you try to break the game down into little components and say, you know, I know better players do this better than me, so I'm just going to focus on this one thing for right now, and then I'll worry about everything else later. As far as why my channel name is Magnet, I changed my name a little while ago. It was kind of a silly joke that my wife had come up with, so if you really want to know, look up okay, here's the story. I have some friends that are Korean, and they made a clan called Boji Clan, and I'm sure anybody that's Korean that's watching this is like, wow. So go look that up and then put 2 and 2 together, I guess. Okay, so this person says they're playing TvT, they get medevacs dropping Hellions and Marines all the time. They say, what's the best opening against if they're still going for fast expansion? Mines, fast Viking, siege tank, or perhaps I should skip the command center and play aggressive myself. There are some economic ways to do this, and most of the time they will involve mines in some capacity or another. The one thing you can do if you're having trouble covering all the ground between your two bases is that you can just make your command center on the high ground and not float it down until it's time. That'll still put you ahead against a lot of these aggressive builds, and then you'll have less area to cover until you move your command center. The best thing against early plays like this, though, are your own Hellions. So it kind of sucks if you're going for a fast command center, because anything that goes gas first is going to get Hellions out faster than you will. But if you really need it, then I would say mines are decent. It depends on where they're usually dropping, since you can usually catch things like Banshees or Medevacs heading in. Or if they try to just bust up your ramp, you can place them on your ramp. You just kind of need to estimate where they're going to go and try to place your mines the best you can. But typically, your own Hellions in reasonably equal numbers and your own Marines in reasonably equal numbers is going to be the best thing. Honestly, early command center builds are not that popular in TvT just because of these faster opening builds. It's pretty rare at the pro level to see people doing faster command center builds. So if you're really having a hard time, then I would just slow it down, maybe open up gas first and get Hellions out and stuff, since they're usually going to be the answer to most of those early attacks, and then worry about things like turrets and stuff against Banshees. But typically Hellion plus whatever else you need to defend whatever they're doing. Say if it's a Banshee, you'll want to get a Viking and a Raven or something like that. You might just want to try going for a earlier gas rather than earlier command center, because fast gas first in TvT is almost like the way to play every time. But there's a lot of different options. A lot of different people do various things, and if you see early expansion builds in TvT at the pro level, it's often because they're just trying to abuse something that they know their opponent's going to do. So I'd consider slowing your command center down in some way or another. So this person says, you've talked about how boring the corruptor is for Zerg in a previous video. What do you think Blizzard could do to give them a more fun or interesting place in Legacy of the Void? Yeah, they are pretty boring. I think they need to explore places that they haven't explored before, because right now the corruptor shoots air, it can weaken their damage resistance, stuff like that, and they're thinking about adding stuff like it can hurt ground units now, and it's like, that's not that interesting. I think it'd be more fun, and I talked about this in another video as well, to make them more of like a permanent thing. Like, so if you hit them with some spell, it permanently takes away 10 hit points or something, so that you can either stack it right away on one unit and get it all the way down really fast, or over time you can keep flying back and forth and making them useful. The biggest thing for the corruptors is that they're literally never a choice to be made unless it is to defend mutalisks in ZVP, but other than that, there's literally no strategic use for them. So they need to find some strategic use where you can say, I'm going to go corruptor, and I'm going to do this certain thing, and it's going to be my strategy. Whereas before, it's usually like, I have Roach Hydra, and I guess I'll add corruptors because I need to kill Colossus, and that's not that fun. But I think some sort of way that they can make them constantly involved in the game and make them like a focus of a strategy would be how you make them interesting. There's a lot of ways you can do that, of course. This person asks, are you a Stargate, Robo, or Twilight counter Protoss, and why? I'm a Stargate Protoss, and why is because whenever I play games, and especially when I have people watching me or playing against me, I always want to make them question what they know about the game. So I always think it's funny to kill people with really weird compositions. So say like carriers in PvP, and people will be like, what, carriers? And then they'll totally lose to it and be like, wow, carriers are actually really good in PvP. I usually try to take where people think that the game ends in terms of strategy and kind of push that line a little further. And I think it's fun to get people's reactions once they see stuff like that. Plus, I think playing in unusual ways is a lot of fun, and typically Stargate-centric compositions are not really a thing for Protoss, and that's why I like to use it. So this person says, what's your honest opinion about the disruptor? To me, it's a way too expensive to make it 300 gas and frankly a waste of time, especially coming out of the Robo. I'd rather get a Colossus because it's less expensive, has no cooldown, and they both only hit ground units with AoE. Your thoughts? I agree that it seems a little silly, but the point of them, and this may be digging themselves another grave like they did with the Tempest or something, is to eliminate specific situations in a game. And the specific situations they want to eliminate is big masses of units just walking around the map freely, and they can do whatever they want, so that blobs of units win fights. What a disruptor is going to do is if you have 2 or 3 disruptors, especially if they're all immune and they're all coming from different angles, and your whole army is bunched up, you're going to blow up the whole army. And it's basically a way to force, especially Terran Bio, to be in pieces on the map, rather than always being in one spot. And Colossus don't really do that because they're just a generic type of combat unit. The disruptors definitely do. It basically says, like, you have to deal with this or else you're dead. The only annoying thing, though, is that right now, and this may change, is that if you're doing that against Terran Bio and they have enough medevacs, they can see disruptors coming and just load into the medevacs and unload, and all of a sudden all your investment is worthless. So it's going to be a weird balancing act to make it work, but their idea of preventing big balls of units just killing everything is a cool idea, and I hope that they can make it work, because it is really boring to just have both players be in a big blob and just blob up against each other and see who wins. It's not that interesting, whereas I think especially with this expansion they're trying to make Terran Bio something that you have to be all over the place with, instead of just have more stuff and attack at them. So I think that's going to be what it's for. It'll also prevent silly things like SCV pulls. You can do well against Zerg, like Zergling run-bys or something like that. You can just keep one disruptor back and blow up the Zerglings if he's not paying attention. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with it, but yeah, it's going to take a little bit of work to make it more interesting. And what I've learned from game testing is that you don't really know how your game's going to work until you have a big population of people play it. So there's a lot of things that they don't understand what's going to work and what's not, just because they haven't exposed it to the public yet. And once they do, you're going to start seeing a lot of changes. So this person's getting greedy, and they say, and they have another question. PvP, what's the best way to hold off a stalker rush? I know Immortals are away. Is DT okay for getting a quick expansion as well? Finally, when I first scout and see 2 gateways, is that equal stalker rush? The 2 gateways can go into anything, so it doesn't necessarily mean a stalker rush. A lot of people will make it go that way. They'll add a 3rd gateway, or they'll get blink or something. But 2 gateway into anything is possible in PvP. Best way to hold off the stalker rush. DTs are usually good because if they want to hold it off, they have to make a lot of extra tech back at home, which is going to severely cut into their unit count. So DT's alright. Your own same amount of gateways or blink or whatever tech he's using is going to win defensively as well. Immortals are probably not the greatest in terms of somebody just going straight for a gateway attack. That's kind of an outdated way to do it. Another option is if they're doing like a full-on stalker rush and they are just running up your ramp rather than blinking, you can just cut them up with force fields and lol on them pretty hard. There's also videos for gateway-based attacks, and I'm not sure if I ever made one about holding gateway attacks, but I'm pretty sure I did. Check out the Protoss playlist, and I'm pretty sure it's in there. This person says, what do you think about a player's age in gaming, particularly Starcraft 2? I've seriously considered going for pro, but I'm a little concerned about my age, early 20s. Is there a limit to the age when you can start getting seriously into gaming? I should buffer this a little bit by saying that if you want to be pro at anything, you have to dedicate your life to it. You can't just kind of half-ass it and say like, oh, in my 3 hours of free time, I'm going to try to get better at StarCraft. Like, no. The pros you'll be competing against, they spend 8 to 10 hours a day trying to be better because that's how they make their money. So people's definition of pro, like if you want to be good and you want to play like high masters and stuff like that, yeah, you can do that in your free time if you really want to work on your game and get better. But being pro means that you literally, that's your job. Like in any job, you have to put in a full amount of hours of work, so you have to be really interested in doing that. There's not really a limit to the age. You definitely do get slower as you get older. I'm 29, and I can tell when I'm being slow, and there's points when I just can't work myself out of being slow. So there definitely is a decline in terms of your reflex timings and your ability to just handle speed. But still, I mean, people can watch somebody like me play, it's fairly low APM, and still think like, wow, he's really fast. And I'm like, actually, I'm not. There's a lot that I'm not able to do just because I'm slow. But I honestly think you're going to have a lot more fun looking for like a mid-tier type of clan. Maybe they recruit Masters players. Maybe you go to college or something like that. Or maybe there's also the option that there's a lot of other leagues out there for, say, like workplace stuff or things like that. You can go to local tournaments and still play. Like, there's a lot you can do that'll be competitive that won't necessarily mean like you devote your whole life to it. So I would just look for those other veins. Like, look for LANs around you. Go to events for StarCraft that have open brackets and stuff like that, and go play in there, and I think you'll have some fun with it. This is a long question here. I think the best of it... Let's see. Okay, well, this is quite a few questions, actually. This person's asking... the unit they like most is the Zergling, but they wonder what the best way is to use the Zergling in the late game. There's not really a way right now, and they're trying to make it more of a thing in Legacy of the Void, excuse me. But what you can do, and what most people do, is they start to use little Zergling packs for counterattacks, and that's always going to be useful. So basically, whenever your opponent is away from their base, send in a small... Well, this is a weird song. Send in a small force of Zerglings and try to kill workers while they're not able to defend it because their army's out on the map. That's one way you can keep Zerglings useful, and if you want to watch somebody do it, look up videos of Life. He's really, really good at that kind of stuff. They said they want to research upgrades earlier as well. Typically, if you're going for a big upgrade type of build, you need to get some sort of early advantage, or you need to find ways to specifically kill their army. So, like, if you wanted to go for a really upgrade-focused ZVT, for example, you could research Baneling Burrow or try to kill his armies with Banelings so that you need a lot less units and so that your upgrades will shine through later. But the biggest way is that if you're going to research upgrade quickly, is you're accepting a defensive position, and you have to make creative ways to kill their army and keep yourself alive for a while. Otherwise, all that spent money on upgrades is not going to be worth it. Let's see. The last question is, what type of gaming gear do they allow in competitive settings? Typically, a good rule of thumb is that if your mouse needs external drivers in order for your extra buttons to work, then a lot of bigger tournaments won't allow it. But for the most part, like LANs and stuff are usually bring your own computer, so that tends to not matter. So I just get comfortable with what you have, and if it becomes an issue later on where you need to load drivers and somebody won't let you, then you'll have to find a workaround for that, obviously. But almost every LAN that I've seen is bring your own computer, considering renting a lot of computers and all that stuff is very expensive at LANs. So this person says, how can I use changelings effectively? The rest of it's basically feeding into that. Changelings are basically just to get information. So if you're ever wondering what your opponent is doing and you don't want to waste a Zergling or something, you can just drop a changeling and walk it into their base. And at most levels, they'll often not notice. And even if they do notice, it's like, it was free, it didn't matter. So, yeah, it's really just making one, walking in there, seeing what their unit composition is, seeing what tech they have if you happen to drop them inside their main base or something. There's not a lot of uses for it, and outside of that, I wouldn't worry too much. This person says, I want to switch from Terran to Zerg. What are the most important things I should think about? So, the most important things you should think about is why. So Zerg is very, very different from Terran in the sense that they're a really, like, machine-based race. They have a lot of APM sinks, such as inject, larva, and spreading creep, that make a huge difference. That it doesn't seem that important on the surface, even though it really is the fundamental reason as to why good Zergs are good and why bad Zergs are not. So, yeah, the most important things you should consider about is how to most effectively inject and how to effectively spread creep. Zerg is also really reaction-based for the most part. They're not the type of race that can just kind of do whatever they want and make the opponent react to them. There are obviously styles for that, but for the most part, standard Zerg is seeing what your opponent is doing, building the right units, and also balancing out your drone production versus your unit production. There's a lot of balancing acts going on with Zerg, but if you do it right, you can just wreck people. But if you do it wrong, you look pretty silly. So, most important things you should think about is basically that Zerg comes down to making as many drones as you can without dying, injecting and spreading creep, as well as scouting. Those four things are going to be basically what determines your success with Zerg. So this person's asking about the legality of macro keys. They're common on a lot of keyboards. They're usually to the left and they're labeled M1 through 5. Basically what macros do is they will allow you to map a certain action to just one key. So like if you wanted to press ABCDE, you could map that to one macro and you just hit the one key and it types out ABCDE. So for the most part, macros are really frowned upon, and to the point of being quote unquote illegal in a lot of settings. So, but the thing is, like, if somebody in ladder or if enough people in ladder report you, then you will be in trouble for it. But most of the time they just won't notice. And also, I don't think there's a lot of macros that you can program that will be super useful. So I don't think I'd worry about it too much, but I also wouldn't be too reliant on it. Yeah, I mean, the only things that you could probably have macros for that would be useful would be like accessing menu options or something really fast, or depends on what race you play, of course, but for the most part, the actions are so different in Starcraft that I don't think you're going to get a lot of usage out of the macro keys anyway. So they are quote-unquote illegal. They're very loosely regulated in terms of on the ladder, and by loosely I mean basically not at all. But at the same time, they're just not that useful, so I don't know that I'd be too interested in using those. So this person commented on a video where I said that Thor repair was kind of pointless because there's no reason why you wouldn't do it if your Thor is low on health. So they said, Thor repair is not good because you would obviously do it, but inject larva is good because you would obviously do it. And we got into a little bit of a discussion, and the basis of me saying this was that any mechanic is boring if you're not really given a choice as to what to do. The difference here, though, is that inject larva is a choice that you should do basically all the time, but that separates the skill between lesser and higher players. Thor Repair would not separate skill or make the game interesting at all, which is why I said it was boring. So yeah, they are both basically required, and there's no reason not to do either one of them. But the Inject Larva one is a lot more taxing, and it's really kind of a key mechanic that separates good and bad Zerg players, like I've talked about before. But they got into a point where saying that APM tax is really kind of a boring way to design a game. And I actually kind of agree with that. Inject Larva is a very central component to Zerg, but I think back when they were designing Starcraft 2, they were thinking of ways to make people replace the actions that were in Brood War. Because back in Brood War, there's no injecting or anything like that, but you'd have to rally every single worker, and that was boring. Like that took a lot of APM just to do that. Like just centering it on your base, selecting the idle worker, and assigning it to the patch took a lot of actions. So Starcraft has simplified a lot of those things, but they've also added in some extra things to tax the APM that I think I kind of have to agree that it's not that interesting, but it is how the game works, and I don't see it changing. So this person says they like to practice against AI a lot, but they can't save custom games that they're in. I don't think that they've put a lot of attention to that, and they might have actually broken it, considering not a lot of people use it. Especially since you can take command of the replays. So if you ever want to practice a build and then you make a mistake, so you want to go back and load at that same point, just go into the replay and take command at the point that you want to play. It'll create a new replay when you hit take command, so you can always just assume that if you messed up in that game, just load the most recent replay and then go take command right before where you messed up. So I don't think that I worry about the save games or anything like that, because I don't think that system actually works very well, considering the take command of replay kind of replaces the necessity for that. So I would just take command every time. This person asks, why I don't see tanks in TvP? Are they not useful against Protoss? They are rare. They can be useful, especially if you have a good build to make them useful, but they are very rare. I would say that they're going to become a lot more popular as Legacy of the Void comes around, because they're trying to make mech more viable. But you're also seeing every once in a while people will mix them into their bio armies against Protoss. And it's mostly to kind of run a containment game. They're not that useful for trying to advance on them. They're mostly useful for saying, like, you just can't cross this point, and if you do, then you're going to get wailed on by my tanks, and my bio army has a lot of DPS as well. But they're very situational. I didn't do a lot of videos about them, especially back when I posted a lot of those on Heart of the Swarm, because they just weren't used that often. But they're getting used more and more in pro games now. And I might go back and talk about them, but since Heart of the Swarm is almost over, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of a need. So this person says, a very general question, how should I counter Zerg, Protoss, and Terran air units as Terran? I started the game 3 days ago, and I'm a big noob. Okay then. So generally, if you have any composition questions, you can check out my videos for those. But I think this is one of those things where they see their opponent making these types of units, like Void Arrays or whatever, that they might see, and they just lose, and they think it's because of their composition, but it's almost exclusively because you just don't have enough units. If you just have enough Marines or enough Vikings or whatever that will hit air, and you just have more stuff, you'll win anyway. So I talk about this kind of stuff a lot, but it's not a matter of composition. It's more so a matter of having a bigger army, and you get a bigger army by having more income, and you get more income by having more workers and more access to bases. So expand, make workers, spend your money, and make stuff. This person says, I wonder if you still reviewed replays. Not really. They said they were Gold League Protoss, have no problems with anything but PvP. They said that, so basically what this breaks down to, this is a long question, is they're having a lot of trouble with the engagements that they pick against Protoss, and they're wondering how to better pick engagements. So the best way you can do it is multi-prong attacks. So if you know where his army is, say it's sitting at his natural, you can send maybe like 6 zealots over to his other base, his third base, and that'll force him to draw his army out. That way you can put him in a position where he's recovering to a point you're making him recover, and his army's going to be all spread out. It might be sloppy, it might not be positioned properly, and then you can hit it like kind of from the side as he's moving, where maybe you get the back half of the army, like his Colossus and stuff, whereas he doesn't want you to have access to that normally. So typically a good way to pick fights is to make him move his army before you fight. And you can do that by warp-ins with warp prisms or pylons, and small little attacks to have him move his army somewhere that he doesn't want to. So that's typically the way you want to do it, is do a little counterattack on the side, make him move his army, and then kind of roll into him when his army is all kind of jumbled up and not in the right order. This person says, as a Protoss, I feel like the main scouting choices are hallucinations, observers, phoenix, or zealots to attract the army. What can you do if you can't get observers into their base in the later game because of static defenses? For the most part, you're going to scout in the super late game by just seeing what his composition is. His units don't really matter, like his buildings don't really matter all too much unless you're seeing like a huge switch, but you're going to see that if you fight him. So the way you really want to do it is you can always... Oh, this is the same guy, I think. Yeah, it is. Okay, well, he's getting 2 questions. So the way you can do that is just try to poke at a base that's been mining and see what units come out to respond to it, and that'll tell you what units he wants to make, and then you can respond accordingly. But if you're ever in a late game situation where you have a max army and you're wondering what to do with it, just find ways to try and fight him, because if he's switching into mass other sorts of tech, especially a Terran, their late game tech is not that good against Protoss, and if they're switching into a ton of battle cruisers, they're going to probably have a point where they have like 4 battle cruisers in queue and they're not on the battlefield yet. So if you're just constantly fighting, then you should have an army advantage, and when you start to figure that out, you can go back to your side of the map, make the counter, and then continue on. But by the late game, you should have basically every tech path unlocked and ready to fill out a lot of units at any given time, and then just constantly fight so you can constantly get updates on what his army is doing. This video is getting really long, and this was going to be an issue. I think this is the last question. Yeah, this is the last one. This person says, when I have multiple hatcheries, I set the rally point to one specific spot where I feel is safe. So I think they're rallying all their hatcheries together, which is very common. This person says when they get attacked, their units, once hatched, come out at all different angles and in groups of like 3 or 4 and get abolished. Okay, pretty cool word. Abolished by the enemy. I just started playing the game 2 months ago, so I want to know what I'm doing wrong and if anyone can help me. So what you should check out, and I talk about this a little bit in the mechanics video, is if you hit the center base cam, which is default backspace, which is a really crappy key for it, switch that to something else like spacebar. Then when you hit that, it's called base camera, I think. It's something like that. Check out the mechanics video and I talk about that. But what you can do is you can hit the base cam, it'll center your vision on that. You can select a hatchery that's in a bad spot, and then you can re-rally that hatchery wherever you want, so that you're not rallying them all together. So if you just hit space, click on the hatchery, then you have access to just that hatchery, and if you keep hitting space and doing that, you can scroll through every base so that you can get to it. So you don't have to like click on the minimap or scroll around with your mouse or something like that. Get used to quicker ways that you can get to your base, so that you can manage stuff like that. But for the most part, if you are trying to remax and your enemy is standing at your doorstep and killing you, you're probably already dead anyway, regardless of the race that you're playing. So the best way to prevent that is obviously to not let them get that type of positioning on you, because almost like 99% of the time, if they get that far in and you're just relying on eggs to hatch in order to push them back, you're probably already dead anyway. So so I guess a 2-part answer, but yeah, you can use the center base cam and click on the hatchery that you are centered on and re-rally if you're really having an issue with that. And then of course, to follow up with that, once you have pushed them off, assuming you get that far, you can just hit your all hatchery key and re-rally wherever you want later, so that'll reunite those rallies. But yeah, that's going to be it. Leave a question down below if you guys have any questions for me to answer next week. I usually try to space these out in weeks, but this past week has been really bad. I've been out of town for 5 days, and I've had just walls of homework, so it's been pretty bad as far as trying to keep this on track. But I will get to it eventually, and I will answer it in one of these videos in the future. So yeah, leave it down below if you want me to talk about anything else. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll see you guys real soon with more videos, so take care.